Log in.
Hello, Meta.
Well, hello, Andre. How are you?
Very good. How are you? Namaste.
Morning.
Namaste. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all.
Hi,
Uh,
Alan.
so you're some of you are getting acquainted with each other. You already know who's here.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. So the only person I don't recognize is Shane. Tell me about Shane. Who are you, dear?
Hi. We met a couple of years back at one of your meetings downtown in
Uh-huh.
Toronto, and I still work on a project for Mideast Peace called the Peace of Jerusalem Initiative, and I just wanted to catch up and see how everything is going on your end.
Well, fine, thank you. We'll give you a chance to talk about your project right away. Let's see. I think I've let everybody in who's appeared so far, but I expect we'll see more. Welcome. Hello, Lou Kriesberger. You're waving at me. Do you have something you want to say quickly? Yeah. Hello, Lou.
I'm eager to hear what's going on from elsewhere and try to get some more hope open.
All right. Yes, we want the world to be open. All right. It's nice to see you all. And I think maybe I should invite Shane to start us off because we're going to have a full meeting. I think a lot of people will show up, and I expect that we'll want to talk about. Each of us has something on our minds that we want to discuss and bring to the table. So Shane, tell us what you're working on.
Well, since 2009, we've had this informal project where we get ideas from people regarding Mideast peace, what can be done to resolve the situations, maybe something, some things that haven't been done before. Unique ideas are always good. So we just leave the doors wide open, let people send whatever, suggestions they want. And when they
Now
do
we're
that,
talking. Sorry, suggestions about the Palestine situation. Is that?
yeah, Israel-Palestine specifically. So basically, our project hinges around a central focal point, which is Jerusalem itself, which is the center of everything, because everybody wants Jerusalem, and it's gone back like that for thousands of years now.
Mhm.
And so what we've done is we just leave the doors open, digitally speaking. Anyone can send something in, whether it's by email or through Twitter, and give us a suggestion, what they think would be helpful to the situation. Not going to fix the whole thing, but maybe this will make it a little bit better.
Mhm. Mhm.
And what we
What are
did
some of
initially,
the best ideas that are floating around your orbit now?
okay, well, a lot of the really good ideas came in really early. So we're talking about 2010 probably. And at that point, we had several hundred ideas that had been submitted. We'd only started in 2009 in November. And at that point in 2010, we've had several hundred ideas. I think one of the most important ones was it's kind of a countervailing mechanism for citizenship, residency, and so forth that centers upon Jerusalem. And that way it kind of diffuses any sort of demographic bombs that people are worried about, where one population outweighs the other. So there's a mechanism for citizenship, residency, and they're kind of offsetting so that someone could actually live in one but vote nationally in another.
Mhm.
And so they could vote for their peoplehood on a national basis. Say an Arab Israeli says, I really want to have a positive influence on what's happening. And I would, if there's going to be a new government made, a new state that's formally founded,
Mhm.
uh, for the Arabs in former Mandate Palestine, that those ideas should be in there so people can, take advantage of them. And one of the things has to do with residency. And there's a number of residents that live in Jerusalem that aren't Israeli citizens. The majority of the old city of Jerusalem is but I think it's about 80% Arab in the old city of Jerusalem.
Mhm.
Now, a number of those people have Israeli citizenship, and a lot of them don't. So this is one area that causes problems when you're trying to fit solutions into definitions of statehood and peoplehood that really developed with the rise of the nation state model. Anyhow, so that was one of the things. Anyone can read it. It's very short. It's limited to 2,000 words because
Well, it's limited to that. I suggest, by the way, everybody should do this. We have a website. It's called tosavetheworld.ca. And
yes,
I suggest that you go there, and after I have edited this version of our global town hall and put it up there, it will be there in a couple, maybe tomorrow, or at least soon. There's a place for comments. So it would be good for you to post information there, for example, that particular proposal, and
will do.
and other information about how people might want to contribute to that discourse. Would
Yeah,
that work for you?
it's
Would that,
yes,
yeah.
yes, that would be
Mhm.
terrific.
Mhm.
Always happy to have more input. We would we've never asked for money or anything like that from anybody. We don't do that. All we want is ideas. We want people to, as we say, donate your brain to peace.
Beautiful.
So
What is your basic email portal or web? How does one
okay,
respond?
probably the easiest way is to get in touch through Twitter. If you're on Twitter or X, at I can give you the address there. You don't have to actually have an account to see, but you have to have an account to post, right?
Uh,
So that would be Pax. So it's the at symbol, and then Pax, as in Latin for peace. Pax Yerushalmi, which is Jerusalem, in also in a Latinized form. That's YERUSOH. YE. This is a problem.
Can
This is
you
one
post
of
it
the
in the chat,
problems
please?
is that it's a hard one to write down in English.
Yeah,
I'll
put it in the
try
chat.
to come back and post it under your face
Yeah, okay.
later.
Actually, you can get there also by just going to the website for the text, which is apogee.org. So it's APOJI.org, O-R-G. That's a lot shorter. Apogee.org. There's a link to the Twitter site and everything like that. And the entire text is right there. And as we decided early on, when we saw if we get too many ideas, and there's so many good ones, that how are we going to have it of a length that people can digest easily, like, sitting down for 10 minutes and read something that can make sense to the average person. And so we decided we're going to be really ruthless in terms of handling the information and squashing it down and distilling it so that we can always have it under 2,000 words, which makes it a 5 to 20-minute read for the average person, a range of readers.
Mhm.
And so that seems to have worked out well. We were very busy at the beginning, and lately, even though there's a war going on in the Middle East, contributions have been few in terms of ideas.
Few,
So that
a few ideas, you say?
Yeah, we've had relatively few ideas lately, and everyone's concerned about Middle East peace. And here's something that addresses a lot of the issues regarding sovereignty. And we still haven't, in the last couple of weeks or 2 months almost, I guess, since this has been going on, we've hardly received any suggestions at all. Just a few through mail and through existing contacts, but nothing through Twitter, nothing through the website. Very
I
strange.
think most people feel like, it's hopeless. There's no solution to these conflicts. This one is going to go on forever. It hasn't lasted always. Most people, I think, have just really gotten.
Yeah, they're jaded. They're jaded. There's been so many
no,
times when it's
not so at all. People are marching in the streets in the millions all over the world. this question is more on people's mind than it has ever been since in the last 2,000 years anyhow.
Yeah,
Well,
but we're not hearing about
Alan,
it.
do you think that people really have a solution? That's the point. They can take one side or the other, but I don't think it's I haven't heard any new proposals for solving the problem.
Well, I think there's social movements by people living in the region, and they're drawn support from people around the world. I think there are a good number of social movements that include Palestinians and Jews from Israel, and there is joint membership, and I think that's an important development. There has always been some such activities, but I think they're growing and not declining.
No, my point
and
is not that I don't doubt that. I think there's a lot of action and feeling and involvement and movement, but no suggestions that have any originality or promise right now. But I'm talking too much, and Lori Timmerman has raised her hand. So Lori.
Okay, hello from Asheville. I've really been doing a deep dive in this for over 4 years, 7 years. I've been doing work with the thought leadership, the trainings, the conferences of World Beyond War. So just in the last week, they've sent out a petition which identifies a strategy to end the genocide, which is the Genocide Convention. And they have a petition that will go to 10 consulates in the UN, that it only takes one country to bring a genocide case to the International Court of Justice. And all that court will do is decide, is it a genocide or not? And then once it's decided that it is, then the role of the International Criminal Court is just to bring those who are doing the genocide, to bring them to justice. So by what I'm reading extensively is there's just really a progressive, hardline religious extremist, in Israel in control, which is much different than Rabin, who was assassinated and who was leading peace talks. And some could say that Netanyahu had a little bit of a hand as giving very dire hate speech, hardline speeches against Rabin, and then who was then assassinated. So I would say the leadership of Israel in whatever period of time since then, that these are people who are really contravening international human rights, Geneva Convention, all kinds of UN UN Security Council resolutions, and even something called the Kellan-Briand Pact, which is in between the two world wars. The Kellan-Briand Pact has language that countries who conduct war cannot gain land by having done so. They can't have the spoils of their conquest. So
Well, that's already taken up in Fourth Geneva Convention, and also in the Hague Article 49 regarding armed conflict.
So it's like there's a law against genocide, and this Robert Menotti on his Telegram thread is actually affirming the very exact same strategy, saying many countries are going to the International Criminal Court, and people who are in the know in that sphere of architecture kind of say, well, that court is in the pocket of the US. So this International Court of Justice is has been more neutral and has had some rulings against Israel before. So anyway, that really gave me hope as a path and a strategy right now to stop the killing.
Okay, Alan Haber and then Andre Sheldon. You're not.
The question of international law is over all of this. The International the Court of Justice prosecutor has said this is relevant to the Genocide Convention is relevant.
It is or is not?
It is. He's said it has not had a formal ruling, and they've been very slow to give any formal rulings on this, given the politics. My sense of the situation is that another force is needed called civil society, and groups like ourselves here and all the organizations that have some sense toward peace have to unify our calls, not only for a ceasefire, but that the war makers come to the table to talk. And these good ideas that Shane has got and the other good ideas that deal with all the outstanding questions, they need to be on the table. That's the same thing in Ukraine also. That somehow these war makers get away with blatant murder, ignoring international law, ignoring United States law. This is all in contradiction to the Leahy Amendment. Doesn't allow any U.S. aid if it's going to be used to violate human rights, which is exactly what Israel is doing. But the law is irrelevant, and civil society needs to have laid a much louder voice to call for a people's peace meeting, to bring the war makers to the table, actually to talk with the peacemakers about what could really work out of this political bind that the big powers, because they are in the framework of state. And one of the things that needs to change New Ideas way, we should get out of the 19th imperial century of statehood as universal exclusive sovereignty and recognize that in the new world of internationalism, it's actually a shared sovereignty, and many different nations occupy the same space. And that is what's happening in Israel and Palestine, and in some way in Russia and Ukraine too. That we need a non-exclusive sovereignty sense of statehood and peoplehood, and that's the loyalty in the heart. Anyhow, civil society should go beyond the discussion and the call for somebody else and begin to organize, like the Hague Appeal for Peace 25 years ago. Call all the peace organizations of the world together in a virtual way like this, like what you're doing, Meta. Bring all the leaders there to make a plea to the war makers to put down the guns, come to the table to talk. All these questions have a reasonable, solutions and accommodations that people can agree to live together. That's should be our job.
Blessings. Yeah, I like what you're saying. Yeah, it's terrific. Andre.
Namaste, everyone. I think the war in Gaza has opened a door unlike any other in history. Before the war in Ukraine started, the whole world said no war, and they were trying to get them to not start the war, get Russia not to start the war. After the war began in Gaza, the whole world is calling for a ceasefire. In the past 2-3 weeks, it's everywhere. Obviously not the whole world, but I like to use some hyperbole. The key is, though, that a call for a ceasefire is synonymous with no violence. The people of the world don't want violence. Gandhi and King lived and died to teach us that nonviolence is the answer. And the Secretary General of the United Nations in 2020 called for a global ceasefire proactively because of COVID. But really what he was saying was, for all the issues, a ceasefire is what's needed. So I think the opportunity is that we can unite the whole world right now through a movement of nonviolence. And so I've been very fortunate. I presented a plan for a global movement of nonviolence to Secretary General Guterres' staff. And I'm planning to return to ask the Secretary General to help with the final step. We need something different to start the movement. And now's a perfect opportunity. But because the war is going on, we're not going to stop the war now with nonviolence. So we have to wait until the violence subsides. And when it does, there's the opportunity. But we have to be ready now to promote a new peace movement, a people movement. The people are waiting for something good to happen. And nonviolence, when you promote nonviolence, it makes you feel good because you're creating trust and respect and goodwill. And so all the peace movements and all the good work that's being done right now, all the think tanks, they're doing great and they have great initiatives until they find the little twist that I'm suggesting and add that in, that make you feel good aspect, so the people want to join in. They're waiting for something. And so I think that it comes down to the common denominator. And this is the end of to bring everything together, is to say, when we work for a commonality, it solves our differences and it creates trust and respect. Because without the trust and respect, we're not going to have peace. We're not going to have any treaties. We're not going to have any change. So nonviolence brings about the ability to create change, to change ourselves and to change our cultures of violence. It's tailor-made. This is an opportunity. So I've been asking people to join in and contact me to discuss the specific steps that are planned and then how everyone else falls in, because it needs everyone. It's not just one thing that's going to do it. But by uniting under one main element, nonviolence, it allows us to join together.
Okay, thank you. All
So
right,
I'm going to put
friends.
my email address in the chat. Please, anyone call me.
Mhm.
Just to finish, I just spoke with Alice. Emailed with Alice Walker, the author of The Color Purple, with Mairead Maguire from Ireland, the Nobel Peace Laureate, with Pat Mitchell. She's the former CEO of the PBS in the US. And they're all formulating ideas. And I'm proposing nonviolence brings them together. All it needs now is one last
Okay,
leader.
we'll get somebody here for you, I'm sure. Who's
Thank
going to be one last person?
Thank you.
Or maybe the next to the last person. Anybody else want to join in on this particular conversation, or maybe we should move on? Yes, Lou Kreisberg.
Yes, well, there's been efforts in the Middle East, and I know that there was some specialists who's still doing nonviolent leadership, Palestinian, and he wanted to help out in the Middle East, and of course the Israeli government would not allow him there, and the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat certainly dismissed that. So it is, there are barriers, but I agree that that can be an important element, even opportunistically. The first Intifada was relatively nonviolent, and no weapons were used, and it was very effective. It really changed a lot of minds in Israel.
You're saying the first Intifada is what you're referring to, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good. Okay. And Barbara Burkett, you have your hand up.
I was just wondering if in these very good suggestions, whether it's been considered that right from the beginning, that experts in post-traumatic stress disorder be asked to give advice and maybe help provide means of dealing with this, because in both cases, on the Israel side and the Gaza side, there is going to be such a tremendous amount of PTSD and residual anger and bitterness, and I think this has to be included right from the beginning.
Mhm. Thank you. And you've practically been pointing right at Charles David Tauber, who's with us now, and I'm sure he wants to. I don't see him, but let's see, Charles. I think you're here.
I have indeed.
You are, and please respond to what Barbara has proposed.
First of all, I completely agree with Barbara that it has to be considered, but under a couple of things. And first of all, it is not only Israel-Palestine. We're working with groups in Malawi, in Congo, in Nigeria, and in all kinds of other places. And dare I say it, here in Eastern Croatia. And we just had a little incident last week here in Eastern Croatia, by the way.
Excuse me, Charles, I should have introduced you properly, because people may not, some people won't realize that you're a psychiatrist in Croatia working with the effects on victims of war and violence, in your case, many years after the war, right? So you're doing,
well, here it's
training people how to be, I love the term, barefoot therapists. So if people want to learn how to help in that way, even using Zoom to do therapy, you're the man to go to, right?
I will indeed put our website and our email into the chat. But the point is, this has to be on a long-term basis, and it has to go deep. And Barbara is absolutely right. And it has to be all over the world. We're seeing huge numbers of consequences. And by the way, as I mentioned here last time, this becomes a cycle. Because if you don't deal with the trauma now, and you don't deal with it on a long-term basis, it gets transmitted to the next generation. And then that in turn leads to more trauma, which in turn leads to more transmission. And this goes on ad nauseum, really. Vomik Volkan, I don't know if you know him. He's a psychiatrist from University of Virginia, who wrote quite a number of years ago. He speaks of the Balkan issues since the 1350s or some such. And of course, the Second World War has led to all the issues. And of course, the Israeli-Palestinian thing has gone on for very, very many years. So we believe that it's very, very important to deal with that. By the way, I should mention that we can always train people. If anybody has contacts, we can always train your contacts groups online. We have quite a number of groups, and we're more than willing to have more, both my colleague who is female and local and me, and she speaks perfect English, so there's no problem with that. But please, it is so, so, so important.
I bet there are people right here who have some spare time and who might wish that they had become psychiatrists, but it's a little late for that, and they might be very good people to join you. By the way, you mentioned Vomik Volkan. I remember,
Bolton, yeah.
yes, Bolton, I know who you're talking about. If he's still active, maybe I can get him to do a talk show. Do you know whether he's
Oh,
still,
I don't know. I saw him 5 years ago, 6 years ago in Belgrade.
And he's
But-
cranking on the door, but it's really tight.
there's somebody speaking over us? Shane, mute yourself if you, okay. Anyway, I'll look into this. Thank you so much, Charles. Now I want to move on, but I don't have any hands here. Who would like to comment on something that either has been said already or a different angle? Yes, Shane.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind responding regarding international law. I think that there's a wide disparity in what international law actually says regarding specifically the Israel-Palestine issue. And a lot of people, I hear a lot of people saying, "Well, it's international law," or "This is genocide," and certain person said so. I think its situation is a lot more complicated than that. And its roots in terms of international law go back to the First World War, when you had a deletion of sovereignty from the area, namely in the deposing of the Ottoman Empire. At that point, a lot of the territorial lines for the entire region were drawn, and most of them were thoroughly acceptable, at least at the time, and have held up since then, like the creation of Iraq, the creation of Syria, the creation of Lebanon. All these countries, they were all part of the Ottoman Empire before. When that sovereignty went away, where does the sovereignty then default? The French and the British and others were kind of given charges over various areas and saying, see if you can, work this out, divide it fairly. And that in terms of Palestine itself, it originally started as a much larger territory, which also comprised Jordan. And that was about 3/4 of the entire allotment. After the First World War, because the Hashemites had been very helpful to the British, that entire area of Transjordan was given to the Hashemites, who were cousins of the Saudi king, and that became their kingdom. And then you had basically 23 to 24% of the remaining land, and that was originally set aside in the 1920s and confirmed by the San Remo Resolution for the creation of a national homeland for Jews, and we're still in the same place. The borders, what people call borders, really are the 1949 armistice lines. It's where fighting stopped. It's not like there was an actual border there before. And so there's a lot of nuance, a lot of complication to the whole thing. And just in terms of what we've tried to do, we tried to take the things that work for both sides and put them together and work around some of the issues that are much more contentious. But the most contentious of all, Jerusalem, we don't avoid. That was, part of the whole plan from the beginning, is that we were going to take a very different approach. And I invite anyone to, get back to us if you're on Twitter. We had an email, we had some email compromise a while back, so we stopped using our email for that project, unless you were already a member. But if you need to get in touch with us, you want to give any feedback, you can either do it directly through Twitter or contact me via direct message. I'm the editor on the Twitter account. And
Shane,
you can just.
I don't think you've shown your last name.
Oh, sorry, Steinman.
Yes, spell it.
Steinman.
Thank you. Okay, great. Appreciate your contributions, and I like your approach, is trying to find answers that will appeal to both sides. I want, if possible, to diversify a little bit and share the opportunity to speak with people who haven't already spoken, but I don't see many hands popping up. So if you let's say if you're going to want to speak on this issue or a related issue soon, why don't you put your hand up now so that we can we can handle this topic before we move on. Anybody who has, I know Andre has already spoken, but is there anybody who hasn't spoken yet who's going to want to, because this is your chance? No. I don't see any more hands. All right, Andre.
Yes, thank you.
And then I see Alan Haber, but let's have both of you spoken before. Go ahead, Andre.
Yeah, just briefly, just to follow up. Yes, what Alan was talking about, a civil society, that's really the key. We want all the groups together to come to participate. And yes, from the Hague appeal, yes, Alan, that's what they did then, we have to do again, I believe.
Okay.
But one other element then for that I was been following is a group in Israel, in Jerusalem rather, of Arab and Jew. And it was the women that came together since 2014, have been marching on the Jordan River for peace and to say that we don't want this violence anymore. And they became a lobby group, and they've been lobbying the governments of both sides. Of course, then what did they really accomplish? Not enough. I was proposing to them over all last year to say, now's the time to unite. And even now, the violence that changed everything because everyone's angry and the emotions are at a peak. So we're not going to change it now, as I mentioned before, but what the Women Wage Peace set a precedent of what the people in every country can do. It's perfect with someone that's leading the way. If
Let's go on.
Way,
I want Alan Haber, and then I know that Peter. Go ahead, Alan.
Well, I wanted to take this question in a little bit of a different direction. The overall situation worldwide seems, as many commentators have said, a move toward authoritarianism, fascism, people kind of stepping aside to authority, and authority exercising itself more and more. And yet all over the world, people really want peace and want justice and want a kind of higher decency in society and taking care of human needs. And the war machine makes wars to produce guns to keep everybody rich. That we really need from the bottom up to see some kind of political union, looking how to intersect the American politics, the Canadian politics, the local political situation, and affirm a much more human-centered, life system-centered shift of priorities. I call it a union, that somebody acronym is the Unlimited Network Integrating Our Nations. We need some image of how we begin to work together on a political objective of humanizing this political system, which is taking us to authoritarianism and likely war or choices between leadership that have not provided the leadership that is needed. Anyhow, the sense, a political sense nationally in the United States and in some way in the whole so-called democratic world, we need to see a getting together. And as I sort of mentioned before, recognizing the coming of the 25th anniversary of the Hague Appeal for Peace in 1999, that brought from all the countries of the world the peace and justice movements together. That kind of resonating with that time of how do we just get ourselves together as well as we did, or better in the coming season, because everybody is too separate, and we need a cohere around the purpose, as Andre is saying too.
Got it. Thank you, and you're right. I agree with you, Charles. One more, and then I'm going to move on to a different topic, I think. Yes, Charles.
Well, actually, this is a different topic. This is a couple of different topics. So if you want to have somebody talk on the current topics, fine, and then I'll come back.
Get a little
Maybe
closer
that's-
to the mic, please.
Sorry, if you want to, this is on several different topics. If you want to have somebody come back on this topic, fine, and then I'll come back.
Mm,
Maybe that's it.
Go ahead, finish your thought.
Okay. First of all, I don't know how many people were aware of it, but last weekend was the anniversary of the Serbs taking over Vukovar in 1991.
Mm,
And every year in November, that becomes an ethnic, how shall I say it, catastrophe. Serbs stay inside, anybody but Croats stay inside. We have the disease, the mental illness of patriotism and nationalism, which infects the city and infects the whole country. And people come from many different countries to commemorate this. That's point one. Second of all, in Europe, I don't know how many people are aware of it, and especially Croatia, there are going to be elections in the coming year. And those are also both local elections, national elections, and European elections for the European Parliament. And that is going to turn into also a hell of ethnic disputes. The other thing, of course, that I don't know how many people are aware of it, were the elections in the Netherlands this week with Geert Wilders, who is about as far right as you can get, racist. Winning a very substantial number of seats. Lord help us, will be part of the next government, which will influence the whole, all of Europe. The whole migrant policy is an absolute and complete mess in Europe at the moment. So we have a great many issues facing us. To go to a completely different place, the stuff we're seeing in Africa, there is an epidemic of child abuse and an epidemic of suicide, particularly among young people. So the issues involved are enormous, coming back to Barbara and coming back to the issues of trauma. And what is also around is that there's nobody to do it. So we need people. We're trying to cope, but we don't have the money. We're running out of money pretty quickly. And we don't have the personnel to assist us. So help. But the point I'm making is that there needs to be a large amount of input on all of this psychological trauma if we are going to survive as a world.
Mm-hmm. So you're doing wonderful work, Charles, and I wish we could help you. You know, we all just raised our hands for something, but I don't know how. Bless you. I want to call on Paul Werbos. I think your hand has been up all along. Was Peter Wadham's hand up a while ago? I thought it was up. But anyway, Paul Werbos, how are you today?
Well, it's a tricky world lately.
Yeah.
The issue of the war in the Middle East has not been my main activity in the last week, but I've certainly been hearing it from all sides. And it's kind of hard to be living a life where you feel you've got to be doing 10 things all at once and you just can't do all 10. Just not enough time. But in this war in the Middle East, I've been hearing it from all sides. And the biggest message I've been hearing is that the biggest gap we have right now is a clear enough vision of a possible end game. And there are lots and lots of people who say they want peace. There are lots and lots of people who espouse higher values. There are people in the White House who are full of really deep emotional concerns for both sides. And the problem is what to do if you have deep emotional concerns about both sides and more. What do you do? What is your end game? One of the debates has been, okay, some people say, obviously, the end game has to be the two-state solution. But what's that? And there are people in Israel who would say, you guys have been talking about two-state solution in a fuzzy, generic way for decades. We tried to do it in a fuzzy, generic way. Fuzzy generic doesn't work. We need a more specific concept of the two-state solution that's really concrete, really viable, and we can't make much progress without it. And I'd say most of the people I've been hearing from are saying, what we need is a much more clear concept of what is this two-state solution that really is workable. It's an idea, it's a vision problem. But then in addition, there are other people I know, I call it Dr. Pavlova's solution. I wish we had time to talk about the real people who are really very interesting. And they simply say, two-state solution, isn't that what apartheid was? And isn't there something else? Like, isn't there a possibility of a new design for a kind of unitary state where people are more equal and where it's less of a theocracy and more freedom of thought for everybody? And they have some real problems with theocracy on both sides, and the freedom of the individual and maybe the computer systems that help support more freedom. That might be part of it. So basically, I see that as a vision problem. I'm putting my energy into other things like visions for computer systems in general.
Mhm.
But the bottom line is, I think there's a vision problem. That's the real gap.
Mhm. Okay, I think that might be consistent with what Shane was proposing. Do you think so, Shane, or not?
Yeah, very, very much so. The issue with sovereignty is under the modern nation state model is that sovereignties can't overlap. As somebody was mentioning before, you know, we all have this like shared sovereignty. I'm sorry, I forget the gentleman with the cap. And
By the way, I
that's
should introduce Alan, because he was at your age a very influential man. He was the head of the Students for Democratic Society. You remember hearing of SDS in the 80s? Well, he was
sure,
the man.
very good. So Alan, as Alan mentioned, sovereignties can, in the real world, really overlap because someone sent us in a quote early on. I think it was in the end of 2009, and also, I want to get the exact right thing. Sorry, you know, I'll come back to it. I'll slip it in the chat when I find it.
You'll put a
But
quote in, right?
yeah, but the sovereignty is not going to solve this because sovereignty is by nature the way it's conceived in modern law as being a singular titular apex. But really, if you have shared sovereignty where things overlap, that's really when you're talking about the primary rights, which has to be the right to defend oneself, which is the ultimate right of any living individual. That has a higher priority than, say, another right. Not that you say, not that people should say, oh, well, this right trumps all other rights, but just that right has a higher placement. And it's like sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but in terms of sovereignty. But modern nation state law says that you can't share sovereignty. The only ones who can share sovereignty is, say, a king and a queen, because they represent one titular head. And that has been part of the problem because we have sovereign claims in the Middle East that overlap like crazy. There, you know, everyone says, "Oh no, this is ours. No, that's ours," and you know how it goes. There's people that won't settle for anything but all, and there's people that want to make a split. And, oh, I remember the line. Sovereignty descends from the divine and wells up through the individual. So sovereignty is an individual right that comes directly from the universe, from God, from however you want to conceive it. And that through individuals, that sovereignty wells up into society and becomes the structures that support life and support our continuation. And that sort of sovereignty in the Middle East context, when it regards a singular place like Jerusalem, it has to be a type of suzerainty. I don't know if everyone's familiar with that
I
term.
don't know that word.
Suzerainty is like where you have, it comes from the French, upper sovereign. So suzerainty. So it's like sovereignty, but su meaning, in this case, sur, meaning higher. But suzerainty, basically you can have levels of sovereignty, whatever the peoples between themselves agree upon. So it's not strictly a Solomon cut the baby in half type of deal. It's like, let's make an agreement that says how these states or state is going to function as a unit, but also to have separate representation on a national level and on regional levels, on municipal levels. You know, where is your vote being counted? And those are some of the really important concepts. And by not the Palestinians haven't had an election for, I don't know how long Abbas has been in, like 15 years of his fourth year term or whatever. Yeah, that situation has to change, because that's directly taking away the agency of the people and putting it under a figurehead. Now, that figurehead got his power from Oslo, from the Oslo and Oslo II Accords, and that gives that a special case, a special type of authority. But that has to change when you want to evolve into a state. You have to take on the responsibilities of statehood, and you have to, do all the things that people expect from the state, including listening to them.
Okay,
And
I like that. And I want to pursue the similarity between your idea and what I thought Alan
yeah,
was
Paul's
driving
ideas
at.
were great.
Let's have Alan respond to that, and then maybe we'll go on. Yes, Alan.
Yeah, the king of Jordan said his view was that Israel and Palestine would live in peace and share the land between the river and the sea. And I think from the diplomatic point of view, that is a very positive statement to begin with. And what does share the land mean? What I've been advocating is that we see the reality that Palestine is all of historic Palestine for most Palestinians, same as Israel is all of historic Israel plus a bit for most Israeli Jews. And that these two states of mind overlap, interpenetrate side by side, and that we need a definition of state that recognizes the state as a loyalty of the heart and an administrative system that allows such things as the roads and the garbage collection to be done in an efficient way. It requires a lot of local autonomy because there are different states and ways of doing Shabbat and services and all these specialized cultural differentiations. But people can live together as they do now, but with equal rights. And that is another system that's in the framework of international law. And the basic problem is that when Israel came in and created itself, it essentially took by force land that did not belong to them, and now says that we are sovereign, and we need to expand that sense of sovereignty that says you are sovereign in the same way that the Palestinians are sovereign, and you live side by side. And another element of any sense of peace is that the UN Resolution 194, the right of return, needs to be a universal human right, as it is in the Declaration of Human Rights. And that means a lot of people will want to come back who've been exiled from Palestine. And as a major system of economic development, there is a real possibility for the Israel-Palestine to become a light of the nations. But everyone sees exactly the opposite. Oh my God, we can't deal with the refugees as well. Now, this is two societies that occupy and have a center in the same land. That's a beautiful thing. It should be embraced in hospitality and comradeship.
Mhm.
And in my first trip there, what I was told by Palestinians is, we welcomed the Jews until we saw, this is in the 20s and 30s, until we saw they weren't here to live with us, but they were here to take our land. That's when the war began.
Thank you
And,
so much, Alan. That's a very contribution. Yes, Lou, and then actually, no, not Lou. I want to go to somebody who hasn't spoken. Let's give priority to the people who haven't. And Alistair, I think, has not spoken. Hello, Alistair.
Hello, hi. So I just wanted to ask about not concrete proposals, but about processes. And I mean processes like nonviolent communication or dynamic facilitation. There's a website which has a whole list of different processes. I'll put it in the chat. And I don't think that any particular process might, lead to a solution for any particular conflict, but it might at least put people in a different mindset, and over months and years, at least have them thinking about not just how can I win the war, or how can I get all the land or defeat my adversary, but it might get them to even thinking about different kinds of questions. Yeah, so anyway, I've put the link in the chat, and
Now, explain a little bit of what is this link that you're putting in. You think these are thoughts of yours, or are you connected with some organization that you want us
no,
to notice?
No, not linked with any particular organization. But I'm aware of this website that I put in the chat, cointelligence.org. It just has a list of different methodologies, and processes that are, you could say, creative ways, of approaching conflict. So instead of just fighting each other or arguing against each other.
What do you particularly favor yourself? What do you think is the most promising thing on the list?
Well, I'm familiar with nonviolent communication, which was developed by Marshall Rosenberg about 4 decades ago, and also dynamic facilitation. Yeah, so I have some knowledge of those two.
I'm not responding to the second one. You say dynamic presentation?
Dynamic facilitation.
Facilitation. Tell us a little about
that. So it was developed originally in a business context, but it's been used in I think in Austria and Germany and other places. And the idea is, as far as I know, to have space for discussion, not just about the issues, but also the emotions and even the questions. So even if we're discussing issue X, during the discussion, someone might say, well, I think that's actually a different version of the question might be more relevant, and if everyone agrees, then we might agree to change the.
So this is a process.
Yes.
You're advocating a particularly interesting and useful way of proceeding, but not a substantive proposal as such. I mean, I think what Alan and I'm sorry, who was it a minute ago, were suggesting was that they had particular ways of restructuring the government that they thought might be more workable than any current notion of how to set up a government with sovereignty and so on. So we have two different approaches here. The process, which I think also Andre Sheldon was promoting a process and not any particular solution. I think we're at this point now where we absolutely need a solution, a significant, very clearly defined set of proposals about how to go over to make some changes that could be implemented right away. Lou, you had your hand up, and I suppose you want to follow up on that. And
Well,
then I'll give the floor to Lida.
Okay, there's a few follow-ups. This one, Jerusalem is full of shared sovereignties for the holy places. It's been going on for a long time. Different Christian denominations, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, the traditions are overlapping, and the locations are the same for places. And generally, they figure out ways to manage that. Once in a while, it blows up. But that, I think, is a matter of not the concept so much as of stupid leaders who are aggrandizing power. But it's not as if it doesn't exist already to some degree in isolated places. There's
For sure.
the Oasis for Peace, which for decades has been a binational community, bilingual, totally, and it functions to give education to many, many students throughout Israel. But I want to make just another kind of point. Besides what we can come up with, which would be good ideas for them, those of us who are not living in the Middle East are subjects of our own governments, and they are playing a role and influential. We ought to think about what we think our own governments ought to do, because they were going to be more and more relevant. Personally, I've been a member of a dialogue group of Jews, Arabs, and neither of the above for 35 years. We've been meeting in dialogue, and I think the major contribution that we've done is that we've been part of, when we started, it was this unusual mix, and we would make demonstrations of going to churches and talking, and they'd see a Jew and a Palestinian who looked like they were friends. And it began to, it was a drop of changing the way in which the Jewish community, for example, changed some of its thinking about what should be done in the Middle East and what the United States government role should be. And for those of us who are not going to be activists on the scene, there are these other kinds of roles that also can be contributed to changing thinking and broadening thinking. In the end, it has to be the people there who decide
Thank you so
what
much,
will
Lou.
work.
I want to go on to Lida, and then I have an enigmatic message here from Peter Wadhams, and so I want to get to him pretty soon. So Lida.
Yeah, what I was saying is that what I was thinking is that all of these ways, all of these ideas, at the end may not work. And there was a fear among many groups in Greece that Israel just wants to take over Gaza like the West Bank. And some papers surfaced that saying that Greece would be forced to take 500,000 Palestinian refugees. Does anybody have any more information on this? What's going to happen? I mean, Israel starts bombing and says half of Gaza must be emptied. That's 2.5 million people. So I mean, it's one of the most thickly populated, densely populated places on Earth. So, what is going to happen with all of these refugee people?
Mhm.
If Israel wants to take over, as it seems to be the case, take over Gaza, the same thing as the West Bank.
Well, I think somebody should answer that. It's probably got a straightforward, simple, direct answer, but I don't know what it is personally.
I
Who knows the answer?
it,
Shane.
I don't know if it's a full and complete answer, but just a little background on the Rafah border crossing and areas contiguous to Gaza inside of Egypt. Several years ago, the Egyptian government, as part of a peace venture, proposed that they would give 800 square kilometers of the Sinai to the Palestinians so that Gaza could be expanded. I mean, Gaza is a high population area, but it's not dense like a city like Toronto. We have 2.5 million people in a much smaller and relatively smaller area than Gaza, and everyone's very comfortable. And people in Gaza could be very comfortable too, but there's obviously there's a lot of stress involved in that area. Now that doesn't help to allay anybody's concerns, but the offer was there from Egypt to expand this. They were told, step back, don't, I'm just giving you some background of things that I know because of people I've spoken to. Egypt was told, step back, don't get involved. And at the beginning of this, when they were asking the Gaza civilians to move southward, and they originally wanted them to go to temporary humanitarian service areas inside of Egypt, but Egypt was told, don't do it. And so as far as I know, from the Israeli side, they do not want to take over Gaza. I haven't spoken to one Israeli in the last 6 or 8 years that has said that they want Gaza back. That's not in the cards. I don't think. Maybe some people, I saw some people online had some T-shirts that goes, make Gaza part of Israel, but this is like a very, very small amount of people. I don't think that Gaza is going to have a great time over the next couple of months. I hope that things come to a more peaceful, at least temporary resolution, but I can't see any way that people don't move into Egypt. And so I think once the conflict is over, the Hamas conflict, the Israel conflict is over, then the people would, of course, be allowed to come back in, but there's going to be a lot of work to be done. This is if the international community really wants to get involved, that's the point that I think, this is my personal opinion, not talking on behalf of the Peace of Jerusalem. But if they want to come, Hamas can't come back in. Israel will not allow that. But they want the people to be able to come back in, and that's what I've got from every reputable contact I've spoken to.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to call Alida. I have to say I'm a little troubled, but I didn't get to Peter Wadhams because he said, in effect, he wanted to speak or something, and I didn't call him immediately, so he's gone. So I feel bad. I want to talk about his wonderful letter, the paper he's recently published. Anyway, Alida, something quickly, and then I want to turn to Dinesh Xavier. Lida.
Well, it's.
Did you have your hand up more? You wanted to talk further?
No, I just put it down just to say that we don't even know what to believe anymore. It's things come from all directions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very confusing. It's a very complicated issue, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. And Dinesh.
Yeah, sorry, Shane. I guess it was more a question to Shane because I thought the Gaza Strip is actually, Toronto is double the size. And the only reason I mentioned that is because of how small it really is. Because I think it's like just over 300 or almost under 400 kilometers, meaning there's a lot of people really tightly netted in there, just in terms of size-wise, right? which then I think just concerns me, because then it causes there's a whole other issue that needs to be looked into. Maybe I misunderstood what you said. I just wanted to get some clarity.
No, I think I don't have the square kilometerage for Toronto. Toronto's about 20 kilometers wide by about 10 kilometers
Okay.
north and south. So it's roughly I guess it's less than the size of Gaza then, if that was the size of Gaza.
For some reason I thought Toronto was bigger, but again, it's just to do with the
Yeah,
population.
well, Toronto's got like our $2.5 million or 2.5 million person core population, and then the whole area surrounding Toronto is probably like 7 million. So
Right.
it's pretty.
Yeah.
It's
Sorry,
fairly
it was
dense,
just
but there's
more of a question. Yeah, I just want to get some clarity and understanding just what you were saying earlier. Okay, sorry.
yeah. No,
Thank you.
go ahead, because I think you had another point, didn't you?
Yeah.
No, I just was really concerned because I always saw it as I just was trying to understand like how, that population, obviously with the growth of that population in that smaller area with the current sort of,
Yeah, I think it would be.
justices that
I
they're
think it would.
facing, like, does that mean, it's going to cause more violence? Like that's how I kind of, the
Yeah, well, I was looking over some of the more recent history of the last 5 to 8 years, and in terms of what moves Egypt has made, and I was really supportive of that expanded area. It would remain under Egyptian sovereignty,
yeah.
but it would be an autonomous Palestinian area contiguous to Gaza that would increase the size of Gaza by about 3 times or more, whatever it is. So that would be helpful because
Right.
less pressure in terms of density.
Yeah, and I'm
But
just also then wondering about the development. Then they could, let's say you could create more infrastructure there that could, deter a lot of people from then having the need to sort of fall into sort of the more violent track that is also being preached there, right? I don't know.
yeah,
I'm
of
just trying to
course.
figure out with that.
Opportunity is really important, and Hamas really has stopped the Palestinians in Gaza from having access to opportunities. A lot of people don't know this, but Netanyahu had steadily been increasing the amount of Gaza workers that could come into Israel. When he came in his second last election, I think it was at about 4,000 workers, and just before October 7th. It was up to like 20,000 workers were coming from Gaza to Israel, where they earned good wages, and it gave returns to the community. Now,
How long would the average person stay there? Do they go home every night, or what's the
yeah,
rule?
we're talking relatively close distances. A number of people are they're workers who have trades. Other people are like there's a lot of construction people. There's a lot of pipe fitters and plumbers and all kinds of like electricians. As long as they're rated to do that work in Israel, they can do it. And they had gotten up to a considerable amount on a daily basis until this happened, and it only sets it back, and the amount of destruction of property sets it all back. But at the same time, it's almost like it gives you, it's a horrible thing to say, but it almost gives you the opportunity for a fresh slate to recreate Gaza, so that it is more beneficial to its people and less of a danger to its neighbors.
Okay, well, thank you all. I think we've spent well over the half of our time now on this issue, and we could certainly spend 10 times as much time on it if we allowed ourselves that thrill and pleasure, which I find. Look, I think I'm regretful that I didn't get to Peter Wadhams. But let me tell you a little bit about what he has done recently. Peter Wadhams has attended several of these meetings, and I see him in other contexts because he's frequently on the talk shows or forums that I organize having to do with restoring climate to pre-industrial periods, especially the Arctic, because he's probably the world's leading authority on Arctic sea ice. And he has just written, along with several co-authors, a paper called Bad Science and Good Intentions Prevent Effective Climate Action. And what this paper is arguing is basically that we have dawdled along too long, taking our time, and have not, the science hasn't been accurate enough or active enough to show the urgency of the situation, and that we're out of time and urgently must take much stronger actions to cool the planet and to use various kinds of interventions that go beyond reducing the emissions of carbon into the atmosphere. We have to take measures to either remove carbon from the atmosphere and or reflect sunshine away from the planet so that less of it penetrates and stays in the atmosphere, heating us up and heating and melting the sea ice and so on. So we have to take stronger interventions. I think some people avoid using the word geoengineering, but I think that's really, I don't feel shy about calling it that, because I think it's time to refer to it in the terminology that people are familiar with, even if they until now have mainly opposed it. So there's suddenly, I've also seen in the Economist, just this morning I was reading it, that the scientists and even the engineers and the politicians are beginning to treat geoengineering as a respectable idea, at least worth exploring. They're a little bit hesitant to say that we should immediately start implementing some of these proposals. But I know that Peter Wadhams has reviewed the evidence, the scientific evidence in this paper, and it's way too long to put on our website, but I will put links to it and a summary or something like a concise version there. And I see that Adam has joined us. He may have something to add to this, because he may have been watching for other messages. Anyway, that's my news that I wanted to have an opportunity to talk with Peter Wadhams about this paper, which is getting global attention now. I have received probably 20 emails, people commenting on that particular paper. It's almost as important as something that James Hansen published a couple of weeks ago, called something like Global Warming in the Pipeline, suggesting that we're doomed to receive a lot more global warming than we want, because it's already in the pipeline, as it were, and it's coming at us pretty fast, no matter whether we like it or not. So I wanted to refer to that, and I wish that Peter were still with me so I could call on him and explore that with him. Failing that, let's see if we do want to change to a different topic. And I don't know, nobody else has put your hand up to talk about a different topic. But I wonder if
we have a voice from Ukraine.
Where is our Ukrainian person in Warsaw? Let's see. Are you with us? Here's Alexei. Yes,
here.
Hi, Alexei.
I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
Hello.
Oh.
Hi, Alexei. You want to tell Alan what you're up to?
Well, I'm going through a refugee process in Warsaw right now. On November 4, I filed an application to get my refugee status. I don't know. It's gonna last for several months, probably half a year, and then we'll see what happens. Well, now I live in Warsaw, and I cannot leave Poland. I have to stay in the country.
What now? Say
Or
this again. You're a Russian expatriate
yeah,
fleeing from being mobilized to go fight Ukrainians. And you went to Istanbul, then you went to Warsaw, and now
yes,
you can't leave Warsaw because you're applying for what?
I can live in Poland, anywhere in Poland, because over the time, over these probably 6 months, that my refugee application will be dealt with by the government.
How come you haven't been a refugee all along?
Well, I just officially I filed. I had a humanitarian visa for 1 year, and it was about to expire in early November. So before it expired, I went to the state authorities, to the border patrol service, and I filed for international protection. Now my case is being considered. It's going to take some time, as is always the case, about up to from 6 months to 1 year, most probably.
I frankly didn't know the difference between being humanitarian protection and refugee status.
Yes.
Sorry to be ignorant, but can you help me?
So humanitarian visa is a visa that allows me to enter Poland. That allowed me to enter Poland and live here for up to 1 year. And now that I applied for a humanitarian for a refugee status, if I'm granted that status, I will get a permanent residence card here in Poland.
And what's the difference? What is harder about getting a refugee status than humanitarian status?
Humanitarian visa is only for 1 year.
Okay.
You cannot.
So they're pretty generous with that, but if you got refugee status, it would be more like a permanent thing. Is that it?
It will be, yes, until things change, but they're not likely to change in Russia, I think. I thought they would change in this summer, but since it didn't happen, I don't think they will change anytime soon.
So
Really,
are
because
there lots of other people in your situation, people whose visas are going to expire, but they have to find some alternative?
yes, that's right.
Yeah.
They have to apply for a permanent status, which is a refugee status.
Well, is that pretty much a foregone conclusion that they'll be granted that or not?
No. Well, the lawyer that I talked to, she told me that people with much weaker cases than mine almost always get that status.
What would make yours a little more problematic?
It's stronger, actually. People with weaker cases.
Yeah. Okay. I see. So you have a stronger case. Why? Why are you more of a refugee than I would be?
Yeah, because I just wrote openly about the war on my Facebook page under my own name, because even people who used the pseudonyms, who used fake names, even they got a refugee on the basis of what they wrote. Plus to that, I worked for as a volunteer for Navalny and his team. I did things like placing posters and stickers in the public transport and in public places in Moscow, which means that I could have been filmed by cameras and persecuted afterwards, which kind of qualifies me to get some protection from a democratic country.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're probably going to stay in Warsaw. And do you know what proportion of these people are going to find themselves in more difficult situation than you are?
Well, there's no statistics that I know of. Of course, it's always a kind of lottery. it's always up to us. Situations are different, and it's largely up to a certain official, which considers every case. But the good news is that one can file an appeal against a refusal. If it's a refusal, one can file an appeal. Then so it can last for years, and then if the appeal is turned down, one can really file another petition for refusal, so for refugee status, which means that one can really live here for a long time.
I see.
Because
Well, I'm
circumstances
trying.
change.
Sorry, go on.
Circumstances change, so my case will be dealt with for 6 months, and which means, and then the appeal procedure, and which means that a lot of things will change, and it will be a whole new case. And I think the real policy right now is to grant as many statuses as possible to Russians, to those who oppose the war.
Well, I'm trying to set up a forum conversation. I hope I'd be able to do it within a week or so, about the situation of people like yourself who fled the country to avoid being sent to war. And the difficulty is that so many people are finding obstacles to getting admission to some of the countries they'd like to go to, because not every country will accept them by easily. And I think it should be regarded as a human rights issue. It isn't, as far as I can tell. But I am trying to pursue this, and I've actually, for about 5 or 6 months, been trying to set up this kind of conversation, and I find people avoiding the subject. Well, I'm imputing intentions to people I shouldn't. I don't know whether they're avoiding the subject, but it's really hard to get anybody to be willing to talk about it. Anybody who's in authority, a government official, for example, they don't feel comfortable, or they're not, even if they're officially in the government, the Ottawa won't let them talk about it. That I'm thinking, for example, of Bob Bray, who was willing, but he didn't get permission from Ottawa, and he's the ambassador to the UN, you know. So there's some kind of sensitivity there that I don't really quite understand. I think anybody in your situation, anybody who opposed the war to the extent of leaving the country, should be welcomed with garlands of flowers whenever they want to come to our country. I think that's exactly the right thing to have done. But some people, as I understand it, even especially maybe in Ukraine, say that those people should have just stayed there and gone to jail or something else rather than oppose the war by leaving. I can see that point of view, but I'm not sure that by the time it came to having that as the only other option, I'm not sure that it was a very, very good case to be made for how much you could accomplish by staying there.
Well,
I think we could have that conversation. What do you think?
The problem is that, for what I know, I've read a lot about countries like Venezuela, like other countries with dictatorial regimes. And I can't remember a single case when just keeping the dissidents in the country would really help overthrow or kind of change the regime, because there's no really way to the resources are owned by the regime, the weapons, all the propaganda, the funds, the money, everything. So it will not help if we get another like hundreds of another 100 or another thousand of political prisoners. It will not stop the war, really.
Well, you know, I'd love to have that conversation, because I do believe, in fact, I know damn well from research, that there are lots of countries in which a dictator has been overthrown, or at least made impotent. In other words, the dictator couldn't get his way, by a group of people who simply refused to obey, and who were organized to oppose the government. So I know it has worked. However, if you wait until the oppressor or the invader has come, or the dictator has come to power, and you haven't got yourself organized in advance, it's sure difficult. And I would agree with you on that point, that as of now, the prospect of being able to oppose Putin by any one person staying in that country rather than fleeing is not very promising. But had people in advance seen what was coming and acted and organized themselves and planned, then a lot could have been done. And it's still, that's exactly the kind of thing that needs to be done now, is for Russians to get themselves organized, and the people who want a different kind of government to plan what they want and to work to implement it. But this is a very unpropitious moment to try to do that in the middle of a war. It sure would help to have done it when you saw it coming, and I saw it coming, and I told my friends, and they didn't think about it. They didn't take it seriously. Charles Tauber, you have your hand up, and I bet you got a thought or two.
Yeah, I've been working with these kinds of things since 1988 with various
Get closer
people.
to the mic.
Sorry. I've been working with people with these sorts of issues since 1988. And they're with refugees coming to various countries, from various countries. And governments are unfortunately extremely insensitive to these kinds of issues. And in that sense, Alexei is mildly lucky that he has this kind of a visa. A lot of people don't, and a lot of people who cannot go back to their home countries because they will be tortured or killed or what have you. This is very, very common, unfortunately. Human Rights Watch does some work on this. Amnesty certainly does some work on this. Long time ago, I used to work as a volunteer with Amnesty, doing the medical side of things. You have to find reasons that governments, and in fact the International Court in The Hague and in Strasbourg, will accept. So this is a long and extremely difficult process everywhere, virtually everywhere. There are people, for example, all the Afghanis, the people from northern Syria, and we could go on, the Africans. We can go on with lists for, I could talk for the next 2 days on this. This is not an easy thing. And Alexei is right to get the best legal representation he can and to continue to go out as many appeals as he has to. But it's not easy.
Right. Okay, thank you. Who else wants to speak? I think we can take up something, a minor topic that, or maybe very central to somebody who hasn't had a chance to talk about their issue so far today. Anybody have something on your mind that we haven't covered? Surely there are other people.
Alistair put up a good post on the side chat about geoengineering having possibly unwanted consequences by cooling the earth too much, or making people complacent about CO2 levels. I could probably add something on that. I looked at the proposal that, well, it wasn't really a complete proposal, but more of a mission guideline from the World Economic Forum regarding the development of carbon capture technology. And when I was looking through their like budget figures, it looks like it's going to cost by 2050 about $50 trillion worldwide to reduce carbon to the level that we need. Now, then I sat down with a pen and paper, and I worked out if we planted trees and increased wetlands, we can actually double those savings of carbon capture with probably spending, like less than 1% of what it's going to cost us to put $50 trillion into advanced carbon capture technologies that don't work half as well as trees and wetlands to constrain carbon to the environment, to the terrestrial environment.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
You're
we have
absolutely
to
right,
prompt it,
and there are
though.
others that don't stick to that format. I mean, there are much cheaper ways of doing things with, for example, marine cloud brightening, or iron salt aerosol, or ocean iron fertilization. There are a number of technologies that are dirt cheap, and compared to any of these other things. Let's see. I think Alexei and then Paul Werbos.
Well, I just wanted to say that being a refugee is a privilege, of course, but I think it should be a privilege that's taken with that needs to be taken with a little bit of responsibility. Being outside the country, outside the grip of the regime, one can really contribute to the cause, to stopping the wars in a way. One example of how this is being done, for example, as you may know, most of the Navalny's team is based in Lithuania currently, and they started a project in which volunteers do participate. So people have scripts for calling just ordinary Russians. They call just some stranger within Russia, and they talk to the people about the war, about their situation, about whether it really makes sense to go to conquer another country for whatever purpose. We talk to people about how their life has changed, if they feel something, if they are scared of something. So that's the way to that some people just are not willing to speak. Maybe they're afraid to talk about such subjects which may be punishable, or they feel they may be punished for that. Can be provocation in our times. But anyway, it's a step that can be easily taken. It's not really something difficult, but it's a way to express gratitude for being able to stay outside the country with such an evil regime.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, Paul Werbos.
Yeah, I was back to the geoengineering.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned feeling guilty. I don't have enough time to do justice to the information I have received. But Meta knows a few years ago, the IEEE asked for me to do a review of what do we really know about the risks and the technologies about the worst case global change. And it was a real shocker to me because the resources of IEEE go very deep into the real science. And I learned very early in the game that almost everything you read in the press, almost everything you read from any major government is grossly unrelated to the real science.
Mm-hmm.
I learned that the real science, first of all, implies risks much greater than most people know. I'm delighted that Peter Wadhams and Peter Ward co-authored a paper for me which summarizes those risks. And then the question is, what can you do about them? And it turns out IEEE knows more about technology than almost any major government because we have access to every major engineering society in the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
And what I put together, if we wanted to have a rational strategy to minimize the probability of human extinction, we wouldn't pick just one. One of the reasons why politics tends to fail in this world is people lobby for just their thing, their personal silver bullet. They spend their whole life trying to advocate for their thing. But the optimal strategy is sometimes a mixed strategy. And we came to the conclusion there are several areas like reduced greenhouse gas from electricity and from transportation, where IEEE can point to very specific new opportunities in technology which are being wasted by the governments of the world. And then there is an agriculture and related where we can sort of begin to do it. Geoengineering was one of the 5 major areas we recommended, but we didn't recommend a crash program to do my little thing tomorrow. And this is the problem that every field of energy technology has. You get all these advocates who say, give it all to me to do my thing. And that's how you screw up. You need a portfolio, you need rational, agile decision-making in the face of uncertainty. And in the case of geoengineering, the fact is when we tried to put a book together, we never really found one person who had the time, the will, and the broad connection to deal justice to all the many types of geoengineering. But the main recommendation was geoengineering is not the answer to global climate change. And those environmentalists who object to that idea are dead right. Geoengineering is not the answer. But the idea for geoengineering is we need an insurance policy. We should be investing in the R&D to develop, not just to deploy one approach, because there are competing approaches. What we need is the R&D to further develop and evaluate several competing approaches, some of which are promising, some of which are risky, some of which are both. And that was our bottom line. And to be perfectly honest, that's not an area that Peter Wadhams knows. He co-authored the paper on risk because he knows about the ocean currents. But when it comes to the technology in geoengineering, he's not exactly a world leader. That's not his particular area. We found people who were. It's very difficult. It belongs on the agenda, but we're not even doing the obvious, easier and cheaper things right now in climate change.
Okay, I hope we will have a lot more conversation about this because it's so important. Yes, Lou Kreisberg.
Well, to follow up in a way, one of the other problems that we haven't talked about, the big issue in the United States, is the collapse or great deterioration in our democratic system. Mm-hmm. People are busy talking and excited about issues which are trivial. They're dangling these issues to distract people from dealing with the serious stuff. Mm-hmm. So just to mention that issue is important, and it's in a way of dealing well with all the other issues. We have people preoccupied with distraction, and that's manipulative. It is to destroy the enemy internally and to seize more power for special interests or others, and and it's aided by external actors like this Russia, who apparently is very.
Well, I mean, that I have to say, Lou, I agree with you, but except that I think it's not just the U.S. I mean, the whole point is that unfortunately, huge, the right wing bigotry, etc., and conservatism. It's global now, and it's not one place. It's all over the place. Somebody already mentioned that. Like Alan Haber mentioned, or somebody the election in the Netherlands recently. It's global, and I don't understand it. But we have to seriously say. I think your point, the main point is democracy is in trouble. Mm-hmm. It's not working the way it's supposed to. For whatever reason, something's wrong with democracy. We got to fix it, but I don't see enough of a debate about how to make that work. Love to hear a conversation from somebody who has a thought about how to make democracy work better.
Well, I happen to have written a book called Fighting Better. That does try to deal with what we could do better. Conflict is inevitable and it could be desirable if it's done right.
Good. All right. You can go ahead and elaborate for one more minute if you want, but then Alan Haber just now put his hand up. So, Alan, you take your turn, and then if Lou still has it on his mind, I'll come back to him.
Well, I just thought I would reflect earlier, but this might be the occasion. We just passed the 22nd of November, which is this year the 60th anniversary of the assassination of President Kennedy, which is the time I identify as when the powers of war actually took control of the government. And we've been living in that system ever since. And every year we go along with the media repeating the mythology of that this was a lone assassin, or we don't know exactly what happened. But we live in a government that has been taken over by the military. And when one would take a look at that, it gets very complicated, and you tend just not to look at it at all. And that is a situation of cognitive dissonance that is the situation that leaves one powerless. Because rather than explore what is the truth, when it gets to be uncomfortable between what you're told is true and what you begin to see is true, then you just look elsewhere and you disempower yourself. And I think that is a problem of the entire population of at least the United States, and that all those who follow the mythology of the John Kennedy execution or the 9/11, how that actually happened. We live in a world of mythology, and when you're in such a world, you cannot think powerfully about how to change it, because it's all too much illusion that you can't look behind, because it's very uncomfortable that we have been lied to and somehow accept it year by year, whatever the anniversary is of the great deceptions.
Paul Werbos.
Al just said a whole lot. It's hard to know which part we should talk about first. I agree completely that we have a growing global problem with fake news. And that's related to the internet, which could be worth a whole hour of discussion. It's a serious issue. On the other hand, you tweaked one of my personal things. With the John Kennedy assassination, I have had a very weird luck, a very weird life with improbable luck of unbelievable types. In 2009, I worked for Senator Specter, who ran this big investigation of what actually happened with the Kennedy assassination. I got to speak to him and the legal committee of the Senate about, there are a few loose ends in your book that I happen to know about, and I looked into it pretty deeply. But more important than that, I had a classmate when I was in graduate school at Harvard who came from an oil company family, very high up. I talked to him, and he said, we know what really happened, of course. And we know the people who were working with the oil industry in Texas who set the whole thing up. I know who they are. And I believe what this guy told me.
Well, what did he hint at? Did he give you any tips?
Well, the bottom line is money has been very powerful in the politics everywhere for many years. And it's a big question of how do we survive despite the twisting and aberration which is caused by the way money perturbs the flow of information. And that's a really big subject. It affects the computers, it affects energy, it affects climate, it affects medicine, all across the board. In each sector, there are opportunities and risks. And if we want to do something useful, we got to be aware of where are these risks and how do you maneuver around these pitfalls that could kill us.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sandy Greer.
Good afternoon. Yes, well, I really want to speak to what Paul just talked about, but the problem and threat to democracy is not just the increasing proliferation of fake news, it's the failure of mainstream journalism that's really deteriorating in recent years. And it really worries me because it seems as if journalists today are brain dead about what's happening to the environment. And most specifically, I speak to the whole issue of nuclear energy and nuclear waste. And I find it appalling that even in the major news organizations, including the CBC, there's almost no discussion about the push by the Canadian nuclear industry to keep expanding nuclear and growing it at the same time that around the world, different countries are turning away from nuclear. And there's continuing lies about that nuclear is safe and clean. And anything that produces radioactive waste is not safe or clean. And so I could go on forever about that because as some of you know, that's really, what I'm trying to fight against is a deep burial of radioactive waste in the region where I live. Just for the children to come, like to stop these stupid experiments of burying and then forgetting about it and when it's going to pollute the water. So it's just so obvious and the science is not there, but there's continuing lies coming from the nuclear industry about, oh, well, the science is there. And I just don't understand what's happened to working journalists today. And I mean, I was a journalist and I don't know. I'm just so exasperated. And there's only a small number of us that are, doing research that really journalists should be doing. And like a lot of us are burned out because of just trying to, make more people aware. So it's a continuing David and Goliath fight. But maybe this whole topic about news and information, misinformation, disinformation, I mean, that could be a major topic for another one of our discussions.
Let me ask you a very specific question about this issue, if you will. I don't know whether you know the answer, but because I just was reading before we started the thing, I was reading, I believe, an email from Nancy Covington, who lives in Halifax area, and they're putting in kind of a new, at least they're talking about these small reactor innovations, and her impression is that these things work by reprocessing plutonium or producing plutonium through reprocessing. And she asked the government, because the government's policy was against reprocessing, she asked if the government's position had changed, and she received a letter that seemed to say, no, the government's policy has not changed. This is not reprocessing. Is it or isn't it reprocessing? Do these small reactors require or bring about reprocessing? And if so, I see Erica Simpson just joining us because she may have something to say on the very same subject. Do you know the answer, Sandy?
Well, what I would like to say is Dr. Gordon Edwards is the expert on this. And so I'm just going to paraphrase a bit about what Dr. Edwards knows much better than I do. But basically, small modular nuclear reactors are another experiment that is being pushed forward. And there is the potential for reprocessing. So it raises the question, because reprocessing means that plutonium could be separated and used for nuclear weapons. So that's the worry. And the other worry is if we're going to create a different combination of various radionuclides from these proposed SMRs, which the federal government is totally behind supporting, then how is that going to mix with the other types of, like the way that the fuel bundles are put together and again are supposedly to be buried deeply in these deep geological repositories because it's different types of waste. And so, again, there is no science to really verify what could happen to all levels of the environment in regard to, how these radionuclides are packaged, and then they have to be transported, and then they have to be repackaged before they ultimately could be buried. So it's just completely dangerous because of what we don't know. And so that's all I can say right now. And maybe Erica has something more that she could contribute on this. Really important.
I'm wondering, I don't see Erica. Are you here, Erica, dear?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm in my car.
Did you hear? Sandy just brought us into a topic that we can't explore very deeply because our time's going to run out in 5 minutes. But I was asking about the relationship between reprocessing and these small modular reactors, and I hear contradictory things. Do you know whether and how these things are they inevitably related? Would small modular reactors almost certainly entail the production of plutonium by reprocessing?
I didn't actually get a chance to hear Sandy's answer, so I'm sure she answered very well. What I wanted to suggest is that the Hill Times had an excellent article by Susan O'Donnell and M.V. Romana, which is running today in the Sunday weekend edition featured, talking about how the SMR project in the United States has now failed. They couldn't get enough funders, and the project has failed. Therefore, that has huge implications for all the provinces in Canada that are trying to get into SMRs, like Ontario. So the article is featured, and I highly suggest, if you want, I can send it to you because I have a subscription to the Hill Times, so I'm happy to make a copy of it and send it to anyone.
Do you think there would be any objection to our putting it in our comment section?
As long as you say first printed in the Hill Times, they're fine about it. Yeah. And
Okay,
I
do that.
know it will go around on the Nuclear Watch Google sites tomorrow morning. So it makes me happy because it means that the United States, they also have a lot of facts about how the increasing costs of energy costs per megawatt are going to be huge for the SMRs, unsustainable, and that's why that project failed, not because of security processing risk, but because simply compared to alternative sources, SMRs are just far too expensive, and they're not even on the drawing board. So there's more analysis in that excellent article. So I'll send it to anyone, and I'll send it to you, Meta, tomorrow morning.
Thank you so much, Erica.
You're welcome. It's so nice to see you, Meta.
Yeah, okay, let's see here. Let me have a gallery view, see if there's anybody who looks like you're wishing you had spoken when you had the chance. I see some people who didn't speak, but I don't want to put anybody on the spot by pointing at Peter Brogdon or Michaela Herring. I wouldn't do a thing like that, but I would too. Either one of you can speak if you have the urge. Do you have anything you want to share? You're the only ones who haven't spoken yet.
Just a second, and please excuse my voice. All of these things that we talked about are absolutely very important and essential. For my part, over the last 1.5, 2 years, I've been very concerned in regards to the development of AI. Also, in one respect, because nobody is talking about how much energy it costs to train AI, to run AI, these huge data centers that also have to be cooled and whatever. And so it's really, if you look into it, it's really gigantic. So that is one thing. And most recently, what I'm concerned about, and I read about it a bit in the last couple of weeks, is the development, or very of lethal autonomous weapons.
Mhm.
And so there is some debate at the Pentagon and in other, but this development is proceeding very, very rapidly in Russia, in China, in Iran, and the US had proposed a non-binding pledge to somehow get a little bit of regulations. All those countries that I've named have, of course, said no. So what I read is that now the US is trying to catch up to developments in China, in Russia, and other countries in this respect. And because, and everybody says, oh, ultimately humans will be in control. And I've read that because of the speed of data exchange machine to machine, that it's actually a question, it's debatable. Yeah, because it's autonomous. Okay, so that's all I want to say at the end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I think we have Mr. AI himself here, Paul Werbos. Where'd you go, Paul?
Well, I should be in sight. I agree 100% with your concern. The main reason I haven't worked as hard on climate this past year is because the AI challenge has been growing exponentially. The governments are totally oblivious to reality. I don't know what to say. A lot of this stuff came out of work I did. And there are people who said, Paul, you must feel guilty, because a lot of what they're doing, they're calling deep learning, reinforcement learning, and a whole lot of other things. Those are all things I developed. IEEE gave me the prize for the original development, but there's a whole new generation coming down the pike. I'm looking at what people like OpenAI are planning to do, what they think they're doing. And it's really scary when people plan to build big, gigantic systems and they don't even know what they are and what they're going to do to you. And the real problem is it comes back to the fake news and the information channels. They're vested interests who don't want you to know how risky their stuff is. And there are a lot of enthusiasts who just say, oh, it's easy. We'll stop the world and we'll get off. But that isn't going to work either. There really are autonomous weapons. I've seen them with my own eyes. I've seen one group of people say X will never happen. And you walk around the hall, it already happened. Okay. There are people who are supposed to be experts who have no idea what's going on already around the hall from them. But it's a very serious concern.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And that's, I hate to thank somebody for such gloomy prognosis, but it doesn't sound like a cheerful situation. This thing that happened last weekend with over the OpenAI control, I thought was going to come up today, but we didn't get to it at all. And our time is gone. We are over our schedule, and I'm going to let everybody go home and have a good dinner and have some fun for the rest of the evening. And I will see you in another month, which will be the end of December. I haven't had a good look at what December looks like, but the last Sunday in December is the 31st. So I don't know how many people are going to be with me or how many of you are out going to partying. So I hope you'll be with me. Anyway, have a good month, and nice to see you all, and I'll see you later. Okay? Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mother.